Hello, good morning. Is everybody hearing me correctly? Just nod. Welcome to this webinar on the fair energy transition for all. We are going to be discussing the research that has been done by several of the panelists and many dozens of others among Europe's most disadvantaged people. The idea behind FETA is to come up with policy recommendations that can ensure that there is buy-in across society for the green transition in energy, which Europe absolutely needs. And it's partly inspired by the experience of some less fortunate policy moves, notably which were seen in France a couple of years ago when a simple increase in energy prices sparked considerable pushback, notably from people who were had few resources and were very dependent on fuel. So to introduce the report and the research, we have this morning, we have Pascale Taminiaux from the King Baudouin Foundation, Belgium's leading philanthropic institution, which has led this project for the last couple of years. We have Jennifer Rübel from IFOK, who has been coordinating across Europe. There have been 9 countries involved in this research, and IFOK and Jennifer have coordinated that process. And we have Laura Rayner from the EPC. Laura is a policy analyst who's been following the research and is now working to coordinate the policy recommendations. And we're very honored to have Adéla Tesařová, head of unit from the European Commission. Adéla is responsible for consumers and the fair transition. So we're very interested to hear Adéla's take on the findings. So this is being recorded. You'll be able to catch up at the end, and we will have a link at the end to the research report so that you can get the full details. I'm now going to hand over to Pascale, who's going to explain where this project comes from and what the thinking behind it is. Pascale.
Thank you, Alastair. Good morning, everyone. If only one is left behind, there is no fairness. This is what an old woman living in social housing in Milano told us about energy transition. And this is precisely the topic of our webinar today. Because time is pressing. Timing is pressing to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions and to move to a carbon-free energy supply. Energy transition is crucial, and even more today with the energy crisis. For the energy transition to take place, policy measures need to be put in place that will have and already have an impact on the way we live, on housing, on energy, on mobility, and other aspects of our daily life. But the impact of climate hazards and of climate policies might affect socially and economically disadvantaged people the most, leading to economic and social conflict. Just think about the French yellow vests, as mentioned by Alastair, protesting against taxation on fuels. Therefore, it is essential to address these concerns, to avoid polarization, and to ensure a socially just and widely accepted transition. Vulnerable people must not be left out of the policy process, but they aren't present in the energy transition debate today. Everybody is affected, so everybody should be heard. This is why a consortium of foundations composed of the Fondazione Gariplo, the Deutsche Bundesstiftung Umwelt, the IKEA Foundation, the King Baudouin Foundation, Stiftung Mercator, the Network of European Foundation, and the Open Society Foundations has embarked upon a pan-European project entitled Fair Energy Transition for All. Countries involved in the exercise include Belgium, Bulgaria, Denmark, France, Italy, Germany, the Netherlands, Poland, and Spain. The project puts vulnerable people at the heart of the process and engages with them to understand their hopes, fears, expectations with regards to energy transition. And this to inspire policymakers in the development of fairer policies. It is seeking to involve more than 900 economically and socially vulnerable citizens from 9 EU member states, whose interests are often not sufficiently represented in the political debates. They are the unheard, the invisible. They include unemployed people, low-income earners, migrants, people with disabilities, single parents, young people, or elderly citizens. A big, big thank you to all of them for sharing their ideas and for their trust in this innovative process. Their concerns and ideas are now feeding into conversation with experts in each participating country. Together with the citizens, they will create recommendations on how to develop fair energy transition policies at national and EU levels. But we aren't at this stage of the process of the project yet, but we wanted to share with you the key findings of the focus groups, as they are so inspiring. The project is spearheaded by the King Baudouin Foundation and operationalized by IFOK, Climate Outreach, the European Policy Center, and a fantastic team of facilitators and policy experts in participating countries. I want to thank all of them for their professionalism and dedication to the project. I'm now giving the floor to Jennifer Rübel from IFOK to present the key takeaways of the discussion with 917 vulnerable people. Thank you, and Jennifer, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. A warm welcome also from my side. I'm looking forward to present the key takeaways of FETA's first project phase, and I will start to set the scene with some background information on the participants and how we recruited them. Afterwards, I will move on to outline the methodology we used, and then I will shortly explain how we analyzed the national results, to then take the next step to present the key takeaways of the focus groups. As I will be saying we a lot, Pascale just mentioned, we are a big team, and I would like to acknowledge the fact that this is a joint product, which is possible through the great work of our national partners in each country, and which are now compiled in a publication by Climate Outreach, EPC, and IFOK. But now let me share my screen and start the presentation. Just a second. Can you see the presentation? Yes, wonderful. So let me start first of all with some further information on the participants. Who did we talk to? We talked to over 900 participants in over 90 focus groups being convened in all the 9 countries. The target group, as we heard already, were socially and economically disadvantaged people. As a general overview, you could say females outnumbered males most of the time, and just some countries were able to reach a 50-50 split, others not so good. So overall, females outnumbering males. The average age was around 45 years, but we had participants from the age of 16 until 73 in total. Around 70% of the participants were from urban or suburban areas. And overall, we can say that we could reach a highly diverse ethnicity through the focus groups. But now to the interesting question on how we reached the participants, because this is a hard to reach target group who's not used to taking part in dialogue formats. So we aim to reduce barriers as much as possible, which is why we recruited via organizations that work with a target group anyway, meaning we reached out to educational institutions, to support groups, community welfare associations or alike. Moving on to methodology and the question how we talked to the participants. We wanted to learn about their attitudes, hopes, and fears, which is a very personal approach, and we wanted to create a safe space to being able to give everyone the chance to speak up and mention their concerns. We used a common script among all the countries that were slightly adjusted to national context. And overall, the script itself was divided into 3 different parts. The first part was to raise participants' awareness to the relevance of the energy transition in their lives, where we ask questions like, what are the most important issues your country faces currently? Or another question would be, how do you use energy in your daily life? Part 2 of the script looked at housing and transport as topics to reflect upon realistic future scenarios on energy policy, which we did in form of energy diaries that were adjusted to national context. Part 3 looked closer to the sphere of solutions. So who should be paying more, or who should be paying for energy transition, and who could be trusted to being able to convene a fair energy transition. After all the focus groups were convened, each country delivered a synthesis note of their results, made up of 9 to 10 focus groups, or even more in some cases. And as a first step, we analyzed all those notes along the overall topics of the focus group script. And based on this analysis, the results were condensed into 4 overarching topics. You can see those overarching topics mentioned on the slide as well. This is, first of all, energy use and climate change, then housing, mobility, and, so to speak, fixing the problem. First of all, energy and climate change, which you can see is divided into 4 different areas: understanding, fairness, trust, and agency. Starting with understanding of climate change and energy transition. We can say that most groups' awareness of climate change was high. They agreed something needs to be done about this. But overall, there were low levels of understanding about the relationship between climate change, the way people use energy, and a fair energy transition. So, for example, some participants did not know about the term energy transition. This was, for example, in Spain and the Netherlands. And what is interesting is that the majority of the participants across all countries had limited knowledge about how to take part in the energy transition. But many desired to receive information on this, information they can trust. So they were looking for answers and to being able to make decisions themselves. Moving on to fairness. Concerns about costs of living, income, and employment was much more significant to participants than climate change in most cases. They would reduce energy to save money, but not for the climate. And social inequality was emphasized also as a significant concern for participants. So the need for energy transition to level out existing inequalities really came through, ensuring that marginalized people are not excluded from energy transition. Many participants felt that they personally would not have the capacity to drive energy transition. They did not feel unable to do so. Especially participants in Denmark, Germany, and Belgium emphasized the perceived injustice of large corporations, governments, and the EU being able to pollute while they would have to shoulder the burden. The next area underlying energy and climate change is trust. And what just came through, we experienced a high distrust in businesses and governments. But at the same time, they felt they would have the greatest responsibility for delivering a fair energy transition. And this trade-off between trust and responsibility for delivering a fair energy transition led to the conclusion that most likely a fair energy or a energy transition cannot be fair and successful at the same time. And there was the desire for information, which I mentioned before. Participants did not seem to trust the information that was given to them, and the need for reliable information was mentioned various times. Lastly, agency. So the majority of participants did not support technocratic responses. They thought top-down approaches are conflicting, and they had a desire for autonomy and individual liberty. But we could also notice a tension between individualistic and communal values, meaning some countries were in favor of collective community-centered solutions, and others doubted this could be successful. Moving on to the next slide and the two topics of housing and mobility. So the use and costs of energy was mainly discussed in relation to use in the home. And the technologies that are needed for greater energy efficiency were often viewed as unaffordable for them, and renters even feared that their rent would be higher due to the fact that their landlord buys energy efficient technology for their housing. And furthermore, renters had additional constraints, such as the lack of control about insulation, and this shows in how far they lack agency to control energy efficiency measures. And just to explain what happened in one country, in Spain, one participant even claimed to be a hostage of her landlord. And others mentioned a lack of communication between landlord, housing associations, and tenants. They would just be the receivers in the end, not being able to change anything or have an influence. Communal living was also brought up as a barrier to increase energy efficiency at home. This was particularly mentioned in Belgium and Poland, for example. Some living in social housing were experiencing a collective flat rate system for energy charges, meaning that they would save energy that other, how you call that, co-living individuals would spend. So individual heat sources would motivate more strongly than being part of a collective system. Next topic was mobility, and we could realize vast contrasts between views of those living in rural areas and those living in urban areas. So for example, several urban participants did not own a car, while rural participants saw their car as a sheer necessity, and they would rather save money in other areas than save the money on fuel, which they need to be mobile and being able to get to their job on a daily basis. Concerning costs and the accessibility of both private and public transportation, we can tell that most participants were in favor of optimizing public transportation. But at the same time, the desire for cheaper transportation possibilities was ranked even higher than this. And their idea was everyone should have access to transportation. It needs to be fair for everyone and not just one group or the other should be in favor of this, of mobility, of the chance to move. Coming to the last slide and with the heading Fixing the Problem. So there were various opinions we could track in the course of the several focus groups. The first opinion was taxing the rich and use the money for to being able to improve the environment. Others thought businesses and the EU should pay more. Each sector should have their fair share, while others thought the state should pay entirely. And others even said small additional taxes for citizens are okay as well, but this money should be used wisely. For example, on research for technology and how to make energy fair and accessible for the entire society. So overall, there seemed to be a limited sense of responsibility, one could say. This could be grounded in the fact that many of the participants felt they lack control on several aspects in their life. For example, the capacity to act, financial barriers, or living in rent. And in some countries, a collaborative approach was favored. This was, for example, in Germany, Denmark, the Netherlands, and France. And the idea was that government works with citizens and housing associations and local municipalities, which overall brings more communication among all parties, and a decision-making process could be developed out of this that assures the energy transition can be fair. And this is the end of the key takeaways of the focus group results. Thank you very much. And moving on to the next speaker.
Thank you very much, Jennifer. That's it's fascinating. Now, we're going to hand over now to Laura, who has the job of making sense of what all this means and what we can do to respond. Now, these are early days, Laura, so you're beginning to digest this, but passing over to Laura from the EPC.
Yeah, I should. I'll start off with the health warning that this is indeed a live stage of the project now, so I can only reflect so much. But yes, the role of the EPC here is to coordinate the expert meetings that are taking place at national level in the 9 member states, but also to hold the European expert meetings, European task force. Our job is to help the national policy partners to take these findings from the focus group meetings, as Jenny's outlined, and put together expert meetings in their own member states, reflecting specifically on the findings from that country, and hopefully with the help of specialists from all different types of backgrounds, whether that's academia or from business, or whether that's from trade unions. The expert groups are made up of a sort of selection of different specializations and backgrounds to come up with recommendations which really do reflect what's coming out of these focus group findings. So it's not to bring the experts together to come up with what they think should be the recommendations that come out of this project that lead to a fair energy transition. These experts have to step out of their own shoes into the shoes of the people who took part in the focus group discussions and write recommendations with their expertise that will build on what has been set out in these focus group meetings. One tool that we've used actually to sort of encourage and to assist with this process is what we call personas. These have been developed to give the members of the expert meetings a sort of better sense of the characteristics of the people who took part in the focus group discussions. They give an overview of potentially an example of someone, the background, the challenges that they face in their life, their key concerns related to the energy transition, and even also some quotes that have come out of the focus group meeting. So they're not based on actual people, but it's to give a sense of over the 90 to 100 people that have taken part in discussions in that country. These are some of the key situations that people are in, some of the key challenges that they face. So in order for you to reflect, okay, we've written this recommendation, but does this actually meet the needs, address the concerns of this person in this persona, for instance? And indeed, as is already happening now at the member state level, I should say we're approaching the end of this phase at the member state level. There are only a few meetings still to take place at the national expert meetings at member state level. We're just about to embark on a similar enterprise at European level. But at the EU level, we're trying to look at what's come out for focus groups across these 9 member states altogether. So, the findings from France, Bulgaria, Denmark, and all of the other countries. we're going to have 3 meetings of our European task force over the next month, which will specifically define EU policy recommendations based on what's come out of these focus group meetings. So hopefully by the end of April, the expert meetings at national level and at European level should have all been completed and should all have come up with recommendations which really do reflect what's come out of the focus group meetings. However, just to ensure that we have actually done our job correctly, the next stage of the project after these expert meetings is what we call the Fair Energy Forums. Now, these will take place again back in the 9 member states, and they'll bring together a selection of the participants who took part in the focus group meetings, the original focus group meetings, and they will then look at the recommendations that's been drafted in their member states and discuss them, but also give their feedback, reflect on whether they think that these recommendations actually do reflect what they heard and what they said and their realities as expressed in the original meetings. And it's only after, I should also say they have to also prioritize them and discuss some of the trade-offs as well in these meetings, which I think will be quite an interesting part of the process as well. And it's only after all of this has taken place that we'll actually be able to sort of properly finalize these recommendations that we've built from the focus groups into the expert meetings. The experts have defined policy recommendations, but the original participants, some of them, have then come back and given their feedback on these recommendations. So our final report, which should bring everything together in one place, will only then be compiled and should be available in the autumn. As I said, it's still a work in progress at the moment. I'm only now getting the feedback from the national expert meetings so that I can make sense of that at European level and see where the synergies are and the differences. But certainly what I've had so far is really interesting. I'm looking forward to reading the rest of them when I get them.
Excellent. Laura, thank you very much for that. We would like now to hand over to Adéla Tesařová. I remind you that Adéla is head of unit at DG ENER, responsible for consumers and fair transition. You can tell us more about your role, Adéla, and perhaps give us your take on what you're hearing from the report from the focus groups and where that fits with what your team is up to right now. Thank you.
Yes, well, thank you very much. And thanks for having the possibility to be part of this project. I certainly think that what you do is super relevant and super timely. And of course, hearing these messages, to be honest, I mean, they are not new. There is little that I haven't heard before. At the same time, the way that you have this in a structured manner and really talking to the people and putting this together, I think you have the possibility to really have an impact. So I think this is a very valuable project. It comes at the right moment. So yeah, I think this can be very powerful and extremely useful for the policymakers. Well, I just was taking some notes, so maybe I just go through them, what comes to my mind, of course. Yeah, I think it shows how big challenge we are facing here, and I think that the findings show that basically they go to the heart of the climate change issue, which is that no one feels responsible. No one feels responsible around the world. Those who are living in the rich countries, and those certainly not those living in the countries who still want to develop. So everyone blames someone else, and no one feels that basically the way we live, whether we are rich or poor, we parasite on the planet, and the way we live is absolutely unsustainable. But no one wants to assume this responsibility. No one just wants to see it. No one wants to hear it. Everybody buys the cheap food and is very happy to have a full table at the end of the day. But no one realizes that this is just not sustainable, and that we are living at the cost of the future generations, and we might be the last generation on this planet for a number of reasons these days. So I mean, this is just my doom. Sorry for that, but I think this is really what's at the core of this problem, of the climate change problem, and the focus group shows how impossible challenge we are facing as policymakers, but as people on the planet as well. And of course, no one wants to pay, and everyone wants the other one to pay. And we don't realize that someone has to pay, and ultimately it's the consumer, right? Because whether it's the state paying or whether it's the businesses paying, ultimately it's the final consumer who pays the bill, because the products are more expensive or our taxes are higher, but someone has to pay. And by pushing it away, we are not avoiding it, because we will have to pay in one way or the other, being it the cost of flooding or being it of the costs of policies. And every policy has a price, of course. And the experience France made and other countries at other moments made with raising fuel taxes shows how difficult this is. But of course, we have also seen that those countries who've been doing these policies for many years, they never do them in isolation. You have to cater for the losers. You cannot raise taxes, and that's the end of the story. Yeah, I mean, and I also take note of the fact that, of course, the communication that we have been developing on the topic is failing, and people don't get the message, and people just don't understand. And at the very surface level, you see it in the different surveys that many people think climate change is a problem, but that's where it finishes. But then the communication about what to do about it is certainly failing. So I think for me, this is a very nice way of summarizing all those things policymakers should know and should be aware and what to do about it. There is maybe one last element I will mention, which also makes this whole thing even more difficult, because there is this expectation that pre-existing inequalities, which has nothing to do with the transition, that pre-existing inequalities have to be addressed, cannot be exacerbated, and have to be addressed. Otherwise, the transition will not succeed. And this is an important finding, of course. We are also aware of it, because in a way, we are putting everything now in one basket. No, we have pre-existing inequalities, people dependent on fossil fuels, which they cannot pay, and we are trying to get them out of that. But of course, unless we make sure that the new economy is more fair, this is not going to succeed. So it's not acceptable that people who were not able to pay fossil fuel bills will not be able to pay or function in the new green economy. And so not only there's the challenge of the climate change, but there's also the challenge of the pre-existing inequalities of the current society, which of course is completely unfair, the current society. So the challenge is enormous. Yeah, I mean, as you said, in my unit, we are responsible for energy consumers and for the fairness of the transition. So we cater, I mean, we are responsible for EU level policies that take care of energy poverty and try to address it once and forever. And then we also look at other sectors or regions who might be affected more than others. But of course, it always goes back to the individual. And the policies we are developing for energy consumers are there to protect them, but also to activate them, to help them help themselves. Yeah, so I think that's what will be from my side. So I'll sum up a very interesting research. I will be very keen to see the findings, and if possible to maybe have some contacts also with the team, so that we can maybe learn from what you are doing and put it in practice in what we do. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Adéla, and thank you for that response. We're going to open up to questions, and I'm trying to field. If I appear distracted, I'm looking at the Q&A. You're welcome to post questions. I will try to get to everyone. I thought we might just start off there in two ways. One is, as Adéla said, there's quite a lot of this research which is valuably confirming things that we might already imagine. But I wanted to put to the three other panelists who've really been studying this in depth, what also stood out for you as perhaps new, surprising, that you think is something that we should pay attention to. And secondly, I'm going to come to some of our participants who are also people who've been involved in this project. And we've had some questions about homeowners who are not a major part of the survey. There were a lot of renters involved. But I think some of you out there in your national surveys have also spoken to people who do own property. So I'm gonna, if you have something to say on that, prepare yourselves. But first of all, I'm gonna come around the panel to Pascale, to Jennifer, and to Laura, and ask you if you have a brief thought on what stood out for you as surprising or new.
Thank you, Alastair. What was surprising for me, it's positive. It's that we haven't met, except one or two people, we haven't met any climate-skeptic people, which is also one of the key takeaway, I think, of these dialogues. I agree with what Adéla said about the responsibilities, but I'd like to be a little bit challenging. Indeed, no one feels responsibility at the meta level, but most of the people we've met, although they believe they have a very limited role and responsibility in what is happening, they want to have a stake in the energy transition process. They would like to do more, but they don't have the capacity to do more. And this is what is going to be interesting for policy development process. They would like to have access to more information, to clearer information, and to resources to be able, for example, to invest in renovation or to access mobility services. So voilà, these are for me the two key takeaways of these groups at the moment. Thanks.
Thank you, Pascale. Jennifer, what jumped out for you?
Yeah, thank you. So the thirst for reliable information was really something that stood out to me as very interesting, because you could really see how skeptic they were in the beginning of the focus groups. What really someone wants to know what I think about this topic. Someone is interested in what I have to say, and being a shy in the beginning, and then in the end of the session, just all chatty with everyone else, just the need, the want to contribute to this topic, and the empowerment you could really see rising through in the course of the focus group. That really touched me and showed that they are able to contribute to policy recommendations, and they have a say in the debate.
Thank you. Laura.
Yeah, honestly, there were quite a few things that jumped out, and it's pretty hard to decide which one is perhaps more surprising. But maybe for me, some of the more interesting points were the differences between those countries that have experienced centrally run economy, if you like, in the perhaps east of Europe, and their sense of concern about infringement of liberty to choose how they run their lives. I found that interesting. And also, actually, what I found perhaps more surprising was it came through in quite a lot of the synthesis notes that actually these people, I mean, we were talking to extremely vulnerable people, and we use that term not lightly. I mean, they fit in the definition as this set of vulnerable people, but they were still willing on a lot of occasions to forego an extra direct payment to them, which clearly would make a big difference to how they live their lives, as long as that money was instead invested in a way that benefited their community, their children, whatever. I found that really heartening. And again, it comes back, as Pascale said, that yeah, okay, they do feel responsible, but they also have massive levels of distrust in governments and yeah, in the EU, sadly. And so there is this sense of, well, okay, we're happy to give that money back to whoever, as long as it's done properly, but with such pessimism that it will be, actually.
Okay. All right, thank you. Okay, now I'm going to open this out, and we have had some questions. Is Anna Bogusz from Poland listening? And I wonder, because we had some questions about the responses from people who do own property, do own their home, who were a minority in the subject in the survey. But I think in Poland you had some input from that. Are you hearing me, and would you like to contribute on what you found on that? Oh, we're silent. I've sent you a message. Okay. Anybody else?
Sorry, I just read your message in the chat box. On the homeowners, we would like to give the word to one of the national partners, right?
Yeah. Is one of our national partners out there willing to speak up on some findings about homeowners? Hello. I can't hear you if you're trying to speak. I see that Anna from Poland is there, but you're on mute. Hello. The floor is yours, Anna.
Yeah, hi, hello. I think that in this question should answer a person from FETA, institution which is response, which is held this focus group. So I think that FETA should answer this question.
Is somebody from your partner organization there? I'm asking my fellow panelists if they can identify somebody who can speak on this subject. No? Anyone out there who feels able to talk about the homeowners? Okay.
Alastair?
All right, I think, yeah, Pascale.
If I may just comment, it's not a surprise that we didn't meet a lot of homeowners because as you know, and as shown in the poverty data and energy poverty data as well, most of the people living with less revenues are just renting their homes, living in social buildings, and the majority of people we've met indeed are renting their home because, as Adéla pointed out, there is a link to poverty and access to decent revenues and housing.
Okay, good. All right. Moving on, I see we have a question from Victoria Petersen-Amargos. Victoria, would you like to join us and come off mute? Hello.
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yep, very good.
I am one of the partners from Denmark. I just wanted to chime in on the homeowners because we did meet a few homeowners, but all of them were all on the countryside. They're all living rurally, and yes, some of them, mostly the older generations, were in a quite comfortable position, but some of the younger people, mostly in their 40s or 50s, who were having issues with housing was because, one, with energy renovations, it was very difficult for them to have access to all the funds that are available. And also there are big, even though we have a lot of central heating in Denmark, out on the countryside, there are a lot of issues with central heating. So many of them have gas or oil. I can't remember what they're called, but they heat their houses with gas and oil, and they are quite desperate to get out of that situation, but there's not a good alternative right now for that. And they just see their energy bills just rising and rising and rising, and they're scared of all the savings that they would have to kind of go towards transitioning out of that, or just being eaten up by the energy rising. So yeah, that was just my little observation from Denmark.
Okay, super. Thank you, Victoria. That's a reminder, of course, of the pressure that everybody is under with fuel prices at the moment, which makes this research particularly pertinent, as it shows just how little margin already exists for changing price signals. And it puts additional pressure on policymakers there. So looking at the chat, we have a question on I guess this is partly about the question of trust, and perhaps Jennifer, you could respond to this. An element of Euroscepticism, was there some participants talked about the EU being a particular source of somebody else paying for things. Was there a particular focus on the EU as a player in this transition?
Well, the main focus was on a national level because the policy recommendations ideally work in their individual environment, but in some cases the EU was mentioned as well. Yes, so we have on the one side local governments, but also the EU as a focus point at that.
Okay, perhaps I could also pitch to you another question on the methodology. Is there was there a particular reason you found for why women were overrepresented? And in the other terms, you know, split between town and country, average ages, you were pretty much in the EU on a medians, but you didn't. You had more women than men. Was there a reason for that?
I can only guess at this point, but as we went through local organizations, we had to speak with the participants they are in touch with anyway. So women usually tend to be more part of these organizations on the ground, having the chance to be in a group and have an educational course or a different way to support them in their personal life. And as such, we ended up with mostly women. Yeah.
Okay. This is perhaps a question for you, Pascale. As Pascale, you wanted to come in anyway.
Yes, I just wanted to comment on the on women as participants to the focus groups. I think other additional reasons might be that looking at the number and the profile of people living in poverty, we have a majority of women, and single families, again, a majority of women. That can be one explanation. And I think in one of the countries, it was mentioned too, that they felt more sensitive in their daily life to energy dimension. They are the ones in the home, you know, dealing with, as a majority, with the management, the use of appliances, and so on. And they showed maybe a higher interest and linked to the energy issue.
Okay, so in fact, that's, I mean, that actually, it's not really an imbalance. It actually reflects to some extent the population being addressed and the sensitivities. Okay, I'm going to go through some other. Yes, Pascale, there were a couple of other questions. Is there a thought to expand the research to other countries beyond the 9 original? And is there any thought of redoing them? You had to do all this through COVID. It wasn't easy. Of doing some more now to see where people are in a new energy landscape after conflict.
We'd love to, of course, we'd love to, but it needs a lot of resources. You can imagine, you see only one piece of the huge team working together on this. But we'd love to, because it's very interesting and challenging. As pointed out in the chat as well, the situation is evolving with the rising prices, the war in Ukraine. This might affect, we don't know, of course, some of the participants' view. We did it also in a specific time of COVID. Which was also challenging because, you know, access to revenue was key to those profiles as well. So yes, would love to expand, but we need to find additional resources and partners. But we've tried to work, as you've heard, in the different countries that were participating to the exercise. We've tried to have a good diversity of countries. at a geographic level from different parts of EU. So we do believe we could capture most of the commonalities and differences that are living across EU, but why not expanding even outside Europe? That would be interesting if we have the resources to do so. Thanks.
Okay, good. This perhaps I'm looking at questions that might refer to the next steps, and without getting ahead of ourselves, Laura, we've had some suggestions. Are you looking, for example, where we're looking at government subsidies for people who are the least well off, to ensure that those subsidies are targeted at the energy transition, at energy saving measures, rather than simply subsidizing the consumption of fossil fuels? Has there been thought given, or will there be thought given to hiring, tapping into the experience of people who, with limited resources, have already found ways to economize and to improve their energy efficiency as a way to reach these target groups?
Certainly on the first point regarding subsidies, from what I've read from the national expert meeting so far, and I mean, I can't at all prejudge what will come out of the European task force, but definitely what I see from the national expert meetings is that there's definitely a move away from any subsidization of fossil fuels. I think it came through quite strongly, I think, even from the focus groups, that wasn't really a desirable outcome. I mean, it was recognized that this wouldn't work long term, and certainly from the expert meetings that seems to be reiterated, and so no other forms to tackle this problem, other ways of tackling this problem will be found. Definitely, again, like I said, I'm still getting the results in, so I can't say definitely, but what I've read so far is that there is a recognition of a need to tackle energy poverty with a bigger view than just tackling energy poverty, because, and Valeria, one of our partners on the ground, has written in the chat, when people are living in such poverty, whether they want to help on this or not, they're genuinely concerned about making their ends meet on a day-to-day basis, having a home, having food. I mean, we're not talking about whether they're buying new shoes or new trousers. It's more basic than that, and so certainly this needs to be dealt with with a bigger view. So whether that's subsidizing in order to sort of support people out of poverty more than supporting fossil fuels. In terms of your second question, remind me, what was Alastair? Sorry.
No, I'm already on the next question. So we talked about the subsidizing fossil fuels. Yes, there was a question about, and I'm going to add a third question now, but there's a question about peer experience of bringing in people who have from these communities who have found that. Is that a way that's a point from Belgium where there is an effort to do that? And I'm going to perhaps also pose this to Adéla, but perhaps also Laura. Another question that we've got here is, we talked a lot about taxation, and we've seen the difficulties of, well, you can increase taxes, you read the resistance, people can't afford them at the bottom of the income scale, and they don't necessarily make a big difference to people at the top. They just, they're not price sensitive in the same way. One idea that is talked about is carbon allowances, making everybody responsible and making that a flat rate, as it were, across society. Is that kind of idea something that might come out? Maybe Laura first, and then maybe perhaps Adéla, you could come in on some of these policy issues.
In terms of the peer experience, just one thing again that was one of the sort of interesting things that came out of the focus group discussions for me was this intergenerational issues, where on the one hand you had the older generations saying, we know how to live frugally, we've done it before, we've done it all our lives, we know what's important and what we don't really need. The young people have no idea how to live like that. They all need new things and so on. However, you also had the younger participants of the focus group saying, well, no, we know how to adapt. We know how to use technology to reduce our carbon footprint. We know how to, you know, live lightly using technology. And the old people, they don't know how to adapt, and they're stuck in their ways using, you know, wood for their stoves and so on and so forth. It was quite interesting dynamic that came through in some of the synthesis notes. In terms of the carbon allowances, one thing that's already come out of the national expert meetings is indeed this sense of everyone having a carbon quota. You have a carbon quota, which then allows those people who really are the most vulnerable to have a certain amount of their energy, which is, you know, either much cheaper or free completely. But then those people who live out of that quota have to pay, you know, progressively more as they go. So definitely there's something that's coming up already. And I mean, I'll wait to see whether that comes out more strongly as we get more results in.
Okay. Adéla, any thoughts on those policy ideas and feedback that we're getting from our audience?
Well, thank you very much. Very, very interesting. Well, for me, I is the importance of redistribution. You know, it's I think that you need to have we need to have policies to price carbon, but what matters more is how the revenue is then redistributed. So for me, the importance of the redistribution is absolutely key, because if you tax carbon, you of course target the higher income people, and then you redistribute to the revenue to those who can afford paying this. So that's absolutely key. And then the other things I noticed down is the perception of fairness, not whether something is fair or not, but how it's perceived. And then the communication. I mean, this is absolutely the key takeaways for me from this discussion today.
Okay. We're coming back to this issue about the understanding that people have of what is going on, where it comes from. Jennifer, you talked about some countries in particular where the terms energy transition was not familiar to people. I think you mentioned Spain and the Netherlands in particular. Is that because people are using different terms, or because people really haven't thought that, you know, we're in the process of trying to get away from carbon fuels?
So I read the question as well, where it was also asked after similar terms, for example, green transition or ecological transition. And of course, some might have known about those terms as well, but overall, we need to say that some didn't. And I mean, it's not the term energy transition or ecological transition or green transition. It's the overall package in that case. So we cannot, we did not differentiate among those various factors.
Okay. We're approaching the end. We have one or two other very specific questions in that. Do we have one of our national partners there from Bulgaria? There's a question who one of our attendees would be interested in a little bit more about the reporting there. Is anybody from Bulgaria here? I'm also looking at my at Pascale and Jennifer, if they recognize names in our. No. So we'll have to answer that one outside of this the chat. And we have a question about the use of wood as heating. Is that something that figures? I think I noticed in some of the research there was quite a bit of discussion about the use of solid fuels like wood as an existing energy source, and whether that is seen as something that we should be transitioning away from. Is that something that any of the panelists would like to contribute on? Not one that we've gone into in great detail. Okay. I am looking for one person who is. I can see Valeria, who's saying she would like to raise her hand, but she can't switch her microphone on. I'm not sure. Okay. No, I might be able to bring you in there, Valeria. Hold on. Valeria, you should see a button at the very bottom left. Hello, Valeria, you're on. I can see you're unmuted.
Hello.
The floor is yours.
Hello, everybody. But well, I was just trying to answer to your explication about my technical problem, and then because my reflection has already been addressed. So just say hello to everybody. Congratulations for this webinar, very interesting, and maybe contributing on your previous question, saying that the term in Spain, in some groups, the term energy transition, it was not the problem that was unknown, but the phrasing using this expression, and also because this is not something very present in the daily worries of the people of the group. Right. Bye, everybody.
Gotcha. Yeah. Okay. Very good. It's 10 o'clock, a little bit past it. I'd like to thank all our panelists for keeping their comments to time, and our attendees for their interest and questions. I think that we've all learned something. We have the chat. In the chat, you can find the link to the FETA website and to the full report. So the panelists you'll find contacts with the FETA project there, and any further questions they will be happy to answer. Do any of the panelists have any final thoughts on what we've had, where we go from here? Perhaps I give the last word to Pascale to tell us just where we go, when will be our next rendezvous with FETA.
Absolutely, thanks, Alastair. I just want to give a rendezvous to all the participants for the final report with the key recommendations of the project, and that would be for autumn this year. So around end of September, beginning of October, there'll be another event at EU level, and there'll be further events at national level to disseminate the key recommendations. And you'll hear, and all the info will be available on the FETA website as well. Thanks a lot.
Excellent. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Adéla, in particular.